Dr. Njoki?
Oh, hi. Good morning, good evening, good day, everyone, wherever you are listening in from. My name is Njoki Kahiu. I work for New Mexico State University, and we have a project that is funded through USAID-SERVIR NASA project. And some of the things that we'll be talking about during this presentation is part of that work, but also previous implementations that we had through similar funding, but through different series of applied science team support from SERVIR through SERVIR funding. And so we will be talking to you about forage mapping and some of the cool things that we are doing here at NMSU on drought monitoring and how we are using Earth observation data to achieve that. And this does integrate optical, radar, and LiDAR data. And during my introduction, I will show you the forage monitoring using leaf area index that I have worked on for the longest time. And Julius will do a demo for you, some of the stuff that we have developed, hopefully working in collaboration with Phoebe, the Huntsville team, Emil, and everyone based in Huntsville. Then we can have this data available for everyone to use because we feel it has more added value than what we are commonly used to. And so just an introduction to provide context. I don't know if I can advance my slides. So the outline of my presentation today, and feel free, by the way, to interrupt if you don't understand what I'm talking about. I've tried to keep my presentation um, plain language, but if I have used some technical terms that you feel that you're not comfortable with, please let me know so that we can explain. So my presentation will be provide an overview on rangelands and how all these things add up in terms of Earth observation data. I felt it necessary also for us to look at African livestock production system because this is where our work is geared into, and some areas we have some strengths in terms of the data that we are using, and in some areas we don't have the capacity. And I'm sure you've worked with people like Catherine who are working in cropland systems and agropastoral systems, and so our work is purely in pastoral systems, but we also have an aspect of agropastoral. But I wanted us just to understand what do we mean when we talk about pastoral systems? What do we mean when we talk about agropastoral or commercial livestock production systems? And then dive into some of the challenges and how we can use Earth observation data to solve some of these challenges. And here we'll be talking about forage monitoring using one of the products that, as I mentioned, we've worked on for quite some time, that is able to separate both contributions from woody vegetation. And when I say woody vegetation, this is trees and shrubs, whereas when I mention herbaceous vegetation, it is grasses and forbs and anything under the taller vegetation that is growing. So we are able to capture that using Earth observation data. It's usually a challenge within the remote sensing community because most of the products that are available are not able to distinguish between these two. And so our work has mainly focused on how can we get this, because we know we have different foraging behaviors for livestock, for wildlife. For example, cattle are purely grazers, whereas animals like camels and goats, in some cases, might mix both for both browsing and grazing. But we find that if an animal is a browser, and we have all these components coming from NDVI, that might not give us a clear picture of what is happening in the forage availability aspect of things. And so we wanted to see how can we separate these two to be able to capture that. And so there are three main broad categories of livestock production systems in Africa. And First, we have the pastoral, which I know most of us are familiar with, agropastoral, but also commercial. Agropastoral is also very widespread within the African continent, but we have small pockets of commercial enterprises that implement intensive livestock production system. And as you can see, this is a map I borrowed from ILRI that shows the livestock grazing patterns, like the rain-fed, semi-arid agricultural or mixed crop and other livestock production systems across Africa. And I believe the majority of West African countries fall under pastoral and agropastoral systems, and we'll look at that and how we can benefit from some of the products that we have been developing here at NMSU. Pastoral systems are usually extensive grazing systems where livestock feed on natural pastures, and they are often characterized by mixed grazing or forage access with other wildlife or herbivore species that live within these ecosystems. And so more often than not, you'll find some of these systems being classified as biodiversity hotspots. And I wanted to show you, for example, in Niger, this is an example of a patch in Niger. It has both its high resolution image, and it has some components of the shrubs that you can see on that image, but also underneath it, there is some herbaceous component. And so our focus here is to separate those two, just to be able to provide more helpful information for pastoralists and also other communities that are using these areas for grazing purposes. Pastoral systems also practice are traditionally in arid and semi-arid areas where crop farming is quite challenging. And some of the dominant species are cattle, goats, sheep, and camels. And I show you across all of Africa some of the areas that are classified as pastoral. This is based on some work that we have been doing for some of our projects. You can see the rangeland mask areas within West Africa, South Africa, the Eastern Africa, and the Sahelian belt where these ecosystems are based. But also in terms of seasonality, because it's key when you're trying to do some of this analysis to understand how does the seasonality look like within each ecosystem. And you have the Southern Africa and the Northern Africa, Western Africa areas that are characterized by unimodal precipitation. This is where we have only one window of precipitation. And the middle of Africa and the Horn of Africa, where we have the unimodal, this is where we have two rainfall windows of, two rainfall seasons. And so when you're doing some of the forage monitoring that we'll be looking at, these are key components that you need to consider in your analysis. They are also characterized by mobility in terms of wanting to access foraging resources because of their seasonality. We have these very distinct wet and dry seasons. And we also find in terms of land tenure, these are communally owned lands, and people migrate for very long distances. It could be from 20 kilometers to like the transhuman ecosystems where people migrate for hundreds of miles or kilometers away from their home. And they occur naturally in savannas. They are characterized also by low erratic rainfall, scanty water resources, but very significant human populations also dwell in these places. But over the years, you will find that most governments and development agencies have marginalized these areas because they are perceived as low resource base, where government favor agricultural research and development assistance in the more wetter areas or the highlands, which they consider as food baskets. But in terms of human population, in terms of the economic gain from livestock production, the contribution they have on GDP, in terms of carbon storage, they are significant ecosystems. And that's why our group here at NMSU, we have been focusing on drylands ecosystems or rangeland ecosystems to understand some of these scenarios and also some of these characteristics, because a lot of research does concentrate a lot more in the forested ecosystems or the highland ecosystems. And so some of our products are geared towards addressing some of these challenges with other observation data. The agropastoral systems, these combine crop production and livestock rearing, and they provide a more diversified source of livelihood for the communities, and they are mainly in Eastern and South and Western Africa, but I think there is also a small component in South Africa. The dominant species are cattle, goat, sheep, and sometimes poultry. And they tend to integrate livestock with crop production, where the communities use crop residues as animal feed, but also improve soil fertility through manure for enhanced crop production. They are very heterogeneous landscapes, and I know Julius will be talking about this and some of the work that we are doing, because he has been trying to like map some of the areas to develop the woody cover, which is key input in our analysis, as I'll take you through. You will find these are very heterogeneous landscapes, very mixed ecosystems, and thus they become very difficult to map using other observation data. And it's becoming continuously very difficult to map due to land fragmentation. I am originally from Kenya, and I know the same thing happens in West Africa. And I've been across many countries in Eastern Africa, but also looking at now countries like Nigeria within West African communities. There's a lot of land fragmentation that is happening as people move towards agropastoral systems or converting land into crop production systems. And due to human population increase, there has been a lot of land fragmentation that becomes or complicates the use of other observation data, because you will find some plots are even smaller than a 250 meter 250 by 250 meter plot. And so when you're trying to use some of the commonly available other observation products, it's very difficult to like get that information because of that mixed nature of data or components that they are in when you are observing that using satellite whatever data derivation products. I mean satellite derived data products. And so we will show you, or Julius will talk about it either today or tomorrow, how we are trying to like focus on this and develop more improved products on some of these ecosystems. We also have commercial production systems, and this involves intensive livestock production, which often use modern technologies and practices to maximize productivity and profitability. Some of the main characteristics for this, they use improved breeds, high input feeding systems, and veterinary care, and a lot of mechanization is happening. And these are mainly dominant in South Africa. There is a lot going on in Kenya, I know in Nigeria and Egypt. Some of the species that are being kept or reared are cattle, mainly dairy beef and milk for milk, and also for milk production, poultry, pigs, and so on and so forth. And I know we can all relate to some of these commercial production systems within our different countries in West Africa. You can point a few people who have resources to like be able to run these systems. At least you can pinpoint them. They are few within our countries, but they exist. Whereas in a place like the US, you will find commercial production systems normally dominate this part of the world. Some of the challenges, I want us to go through this so that we understand how our other observation application does answer some of the problems, and the challenge does provide solution to some of the challenges that we'll be talking about. We find that within the African livestock production systems, climate variability is an important aspect of things, because crop and livestock production are highly dependent on rainfall. Almost 90% of our production system may it be livestock may it be crop production, is highly dependent on rainfall. So when we have the problem of climate variability, it's a problem within the context of African livestock and crop production systems. And so this variability has led to droughts and floods. And with these unpredictable weather patterns, we have always seen severe implications affecting forage availability, water for livestock. There are places that are characterized by low and erratic rainfall, which is highly variable, but also droughts. And for example, in Kenya, a few months ago, there was heavy flooding because the rainfall has been very intense, non-stop days of precipitation. And so it becomes a problem when we have this type of production system that are purely dependent on rainfall. We also have drought and degradation that have increased resource scarcity, thus have worsened situations like livestock mortality. I know all of us in one aspect or the other have seen this in our various countries, and this also affects market value of our livestock, because when there is a drought, animals become emaciated because they don't have enough feed, or they die. And in that process, when we have emaciated animals, their body weight loses, and so people or pastoralists tend to sell so that they make sure that they don't lose everything, and in so doing they are losing their assets because of the lower market value attached to the weight loss of their livestock. We also see that there has been a lot of conflict going on. For example, in the Horn of Africa, and I think of late Mali and Niger, and also in Nigeria. I don't know much about Senegal. There has been a lot of livestock banditry as people try to restore their lost livestock after a drought period. So there has been a lot of conflict. And we have done an analysis in Kenya, looking at some of the causes of livestock mortality. And I don't know if you can see from the figure at the bottom, mortality causes, we have 65% associated with drought, 19% from disease, 7% from conflict. So it's significant, at least in northern Kenya. 4% from other, these were reported cases, maybe it was lost, or it was attacked by an animal, and so it had a wound, or a snake bite or something like that. There is also predation, 5% going into predation of our livestock population. So you can see, and it also affects our livestock in different ways. For example, drought, we find that cattle are very vulnerable to drought because they mainly depend on the herbaceous element of vegetation. So they are grazers. And so when there is no precipitation, at least we find that even during dry seasons, trees tend to retain leaves on them, but when we have a poor performance in terms of precipitation, the undergrowth, which mainly cattle depend on, does not have that ability to grow when the precipitation is not performing per expectations. And so you will find cattle become very vulnerable, whereas other animals are able to cope with drought conditions. And I think with changing dynamics, climatic dynamics, and also pastoral livelihoods, people have started changing the livestock types that they are keeping. We had a conversation in Somalia the other day, and they were indicating that most people have left the cattle keeping business and they have moved to keeping camels because of the drought, how resilient they are to drought incidences. We also find whenever there are severe cold seasons, the diseases also tend to increase. But also in terms of disease transmission, when there is a drought, animals tend to aggregate in common grazing zones. So you will find both wildlife and livestock from different walks of life, they are meeting within the same spot. And so this worsens the issue of disease transmission. Extreme temperatures also as an impact from climate variability, heat or cold stress, increase mortality rates and reduce productivity. And we have also seen, particularly in West Africa and the Sahelian region, we have seen recurrent fires. And one of the analyses that we have done so far, we have observed that some of these fires are being driven by the herbaceous component, because um, herbaceous elements tend to grow pretty fast, and so they also dry very fast. And so fires in the Sahelian region, but also the southern African part of the continent, are mainly being driven by the herbaceous vegetation. And so we will I don't want to dwell so much on that, but just for your information, because this has also an impact on our foraging resources. Land degradation is also key in terms of the challenges we are facing across the continent. We have observed overgrazing, which can lead to soil erosion, loss of vegetation, and desertification. And we will show you, I don't know if Julius will have time tomorrow to show you this loss of vegetation, reducing land's productivity, like some of the trend analysis that we have been working on, we have been able to capture some of the trends across the globe, but with main emphasis for our Seville project for all of Africa, looking at some of the vegetation trends that are happening. We have seen loss of vegetation. We have also seen bush encroachment, which is taking over grazing lands. And some of the current models that are used within the computation of index insurance, but also for drought monitoring, they assume stationarity in vegetation, and they use NDVI or something like LAI to compute the changes or the anomalies to be able to establish whether there is an underperformance or overperformance. But this is being complicated by bush encroachment or land degradation, loss of vegetation. And so a lot of times, for example, in Kenya, and I know for sure there is something that is happening in West Africa, because we did some work for Niger, Senegal, Burkina Faso, and I know there is something that is going on for Nigeria for index-based livestock insurance. Using some of the input data that we will be talking about today, whether it's NDVI, the vegetation indices, whether it's LAI, which assumes stationality, or at its aggregate level, what does that mean in terms of computation for determining whether a region is going through drought or is being affected by drought, or it's doing as expected? So some of these challenges are overtaking some of our grazing landscapes. Maybe it's because of invasive species, or perhaps maybe there has been changes in precipitation. But I know from what Julius has done, that in terms of precipitation trends, we haven't been able to capture that, and maybe he might be able to mention that, because he has been doing some analysis on rain use efficiency. Other challenges, environmental challenges within these ecosystems, we have biodiversity loss that are anthropogenic, affecting both flora and fauna. Climate change can cause short to long-term changes in resource availability, but also affecting water resources that also like is transferred to human welfare, but also livestock welfare. Disease outbreaks, as I mentioned, we have seen this increase in diseases because of the worsening droughts, but also changes in temperature. And we know these places are characterized by limited access to veterinary resources, and so day in, day out, you will hear pastoralists or people, livestock keepers, complaining of significant losses whenever there is a significant disease outbreak. We have also seen economic challenges where people have limited access to markets for livestock and their products. Price fluctuations, we see that in most developing countries, livestock products and market values are not being regulated. So there is this big fluctuation within the market, and we have, at least in the Horn of Africa, I've seen a lot of brokers and middlemen who intervene or are working between the livestock producers and the market, and so they tend to take advantage of the market. So without that kind of regulated market, pastoralists and livestock keepers are becoming vulnerable day in, day out, because of some of the challenges that we mentioned, but also some of these things, the government interventions are not there. The policies to address some of these challenges are lacking, and so it becomes a problem for pastoralists and livestock keepers in their operations, and so they are not able to recoup the investment that they have worked on so hard. Marginalization and also limited access to essential facilities and infrastructure in terms of transport, in terms of education, health services, but also market. And I wanted to show you guys some of the challenges. Like, I think this was taken someplace in, I think, in Congo, where there was precipitation, but people could not be able to drive their produce from the farms, and cars were stuck on the road because of flooding and poor road network. We also see that some of the climate variability and also land degradation have led to increased conflict and insecurity. And this is due to increased resource scarcity that more often than not result into conflicts. This is competition over foraging resources, and you will find this happens between from pastoral to pastoral, but also between pastoral and crop producers, because sometimes pastoralists tend to feel like they have free access to land as long as they are within the vicinity, and so we will find that there will be the trespassing across landscapes, and so you find that conflict happening between the pastoralists and the pastoralists and the crop producers. But it's also a challenge as people move, and for instance, within the transhuman systems and the changing land dynamics across West Africa. There's a lot that is happening. People have taken into crop production or sedentary lifestyles. And so this has an impact on the way people relate with each other and how people are accessing their resources across the landscape. We also see political instability heightening risk and challenges in livestock production system. I borrowed this figure from the web, and you can see areas where ethnic militias are involved in cattle rustling in Nigeria. It's a big problem within our different ecosystems, and so it's a big challenge for all of us. How do we address this challenge of drought, particularly the challenge of drought, because we have access to other observation products that can enable us to do this? As I said, it's an opportunity. Arid and semi-arid lands comprise about 60 to 70% of the terrestrial landscapes within Africa. And each one of these areas, the roles that they play is based on the composition, structure, and distribution of the various components that I mentioned. The herbaceous component, this is grasses and forbs, the woody cover, the trees, and the grasses. And these ecosystems, as I mentioned, they have very distinct moisture patterns, precipitation, a dry season. So they alternate between the dry and wet seasons. And so when you're doing the monitoring, you need to be able to capture some of this information because, as I said, they are heavily dependent on precipitation. And we find that some of the mechanisms that have been applied over time to cope with drought are not working. They have not been effective enough in our communities, but also depending on aid has also proved ineffective. So how can we as a community and the science and the people with the expertise in scientific applications, how can we derive information that can be useful to our pastoralists and also the government in terms of policy interventions to provide useful and meaningful information that can be used in terms of addressing forage availability, water resources, addressing some of these areas where drought is happening, and so on and so forth. And so if we are able to do that, we have a lot of opportunities. Other observation data is open source. A couple of years ago, it was difficult to find open source data. I remember when I was doing my master's, it was, I think, Landsat at the time, and Aster imagery that was quite expensive, and it was very difficult for people from developing countries, but even within the developed world, to purchase this imagery, and you find it's just a small image. But today we have open source data that can be easily accessed by anyone across the globe, to be, as long as you have the skill to analyze this data. And so this is why we feel it's important for you, even if you don't have the skill, but just to understand the background and the context and some of the opportunities that are available, so that when somebody like Phoebe is talking about the rangeland decision support tool, how can you take advantage of that platform to apply it in your various applications within your countries? And so other observation data is providing us opportunities for agroclimatic or forage monitoring to provide timely information for planning and preparedness. Remote sensing data or satellite data is being currently used in the developing world, but also developing countries like all over Africa, for drought risk financing mechanisms. And with this, we are able to address the issue of livestock mortality, minimize food insecurity, and stimulate local markets, enable opportunities for increased productivities. And so I hope at the end of this this workshop, at least we will leave this space knowing that there are all these products and there's a way we can use them, because I know for sure there's a lot going on in the context of index-based livestock insurance. It might not be happening now, but I know the World Bank has been pushing for our West African product. We did some of that work when I was working for the International Livestock Research Institute. And so even if you haven't seen it now, it's time. I know within the next couple of months you will be seeing this, and all this is being based off remote sensing data. Some of the available other observation products for monitoring forage in pastoral systems could be quantitative or qualitative. When we talk about quantitative, it involves measuring and analyzing numerical data related to forage availability, productivity, and quality. Some of these may include vegetation indices. I know most of us have interacted with normalized different vegetation index, NDVI, which is an indicator basically for health of vegetation, biomass density, and it ranges between -1 and 1. And so if areas are from other observation data or satellite data, you can see areas that are underperforming using a product like normalized different vegetation index. But the challenge with that is that it comes in as an aggregate form. But as I'll show you, we have been able to separate that. There's also another product that is closely related to NDVI, the Enhanced Vegetation Index. It improves the sensitivity in areas with dense vegetation and tends to minimize atmospheric influences. As I'll show you, we are also working with the leaf area index, and this is just an indicator of the amount of green leaves within an ecosystem. And so these are key input data that have a quantitative aspect to show us how much forage is available in a phrase, or how the vigor of vegetation growth or density or biomass. Biomass estimation through modeling approaches. We have satellite images used to estimate above ground biomass by analyzing some specific indices. We have also input from radar and LiDAR. Both can penetrate vegetation canopies, and they are nowadays being used to provide 3D vegetation data structure, but also being used as input for biomass estimation. Productivity and yield models. These are growth models. They could be growth models that integrate satellite data with plant growth models to predict forage availability and or productivity. And we also have models that are simulating crop production, is a coupled climate, soil, and vegetation input to simulate forage growth or forecast forage growth. We have qualitative monitoring. This is assessment of forage characteristics and conditions that may not be directly quantifiable, but are critical for understanding the overall health and usability of forage metrics. Some of these could be phenological observation. We know that when we are doing some of the computations that we'll be talking about, they are based on start and end of season, and you want to capture that growth window. And for example, when you're doing the drought indices or something like the satellite-based index for index-based livestock insurance, you want to concentrate on the risk period, which is the period when you expect to have forage available, and this is during the wet season. And so we are these seasonal phenological metrics are being used to inform that they are not quantitative, but they have a qualitative aspect of things. In terms of species composition, identifying dominant species and their conditions for information on nutritional quality and palatability. That this might be a little bit difficult in terms of application of other observation data, but with the emerging technologies and modeling approaches, this is becoming possible in terms of identification and modeling some of these aspects of vegetation. Health stress and indicators. We have a commonly used product that is based on chlorophyll content, the solar-induced fluorescence product. It's widely being used nowadays through different satellites. I don't want to get into the techniques of this. The terms that are used, I'm also not an expert in this, and so I'll leave it to the experts. Thermal imaging, infrared sensors, which can measure canopy temperature, water stress, and overall plant vigor. We have also hyperspectral remote sensing, which is able to collect data in terms of thousands or hundreds of spectral bands. And this has been used either in the field or, I don't know, a lot of satellite products that are hyperspectral remote sensing. But a couple of years ago, we had Hyperion, and I'm not sure what, I don't remember exactly what the European countries were using before, but I know there was a hyperspectral remote sensing satellite that was able to collect data with multiple spectral bands, and this was being used for nutritional assessment, crude protein, fiber content, cellulose and lignin. And I think, I'm not sure, but I think Julius might talk about some of the work that he did for the whole of Africa that could be helpful, but also partly in West Africa on dry biomass mapping, species types and mapping, and also integration of other observation data with ground data. In situ measurements are always key, whether it's validation or training models that we use for different applications. Local knowledge also key, and a lot of times I think people coming from the scientific background tend to ignore the aspect of local knowledge. And with over the years, people have realized that it is important to incorporate some of the insights from communities, because they have a lot of knowledge that could be helpful or beneficial in our different modeling approaches. Addressing drought challenges, forage monitoring through mapping, through use of other observation data. And this is where I'll dive into the project that we have been working on partitioning leaf area index. So aggregate leaf area index, when we are getting data from the satellite, I did explain the characterization of our rangeland ecosystems or the savanna, where we have mixed trees, mixed grasses, but also in there is also a component of bear, which we are not going to be addressing in this context, because leaf area index is mainly capturing the leaf area of plant or crop per unit ground. And this is for green leaf area per unit area of ground. In terms of simplified definition of it, it measures how many leaves cover a certain amount of ground. So if you can imagine, if you laid all your leaves from a plant flat on the ground, the LAI tells you how much of that ground the leaves would cover. For example, an LAI of 3 says that the ground will be covered by 3 layers of your unit area of coverage. And so when we are talking about LAI, the leaf area index, basically the green leaves within an ecosystem. And so when we get this data, it has mixed trees and grasses, mixed woody and herbaceous. And so we are trying, whether it's from MODIS or via satellite, we want to separate that and have one component separate that has the woody leaf area and another component that is the herbaceous leaf area. To be able to get this, we have key input data for our models. We have the satellite aggregate leaf area index. And as I said, with advancement in technology and also different satellites that are being launched or have been operation for quite some time, we have had MODIS data, which has been instrumental in my work, but also the visible infrared imaging radiometer suite. And I think when Julius will be showcasing or demonstrating some of this work, he will be using the VIAS data. And Julius, correct me if I'm wrong, but the bottom line is that you can use this approach to apply it on any satellite product that has the leaf area index. And so in this case, we are using MODIS and VIAS. This is an 8-day aggregate leaf area index time series. And so I don't want to confuse people. So when I'm talking about aggregate, just know it's the raw data that is coming from the satellite as is. Then we are using that data, the 8-day aggregate LA time series, and the currently available MODIS and VIAS from both I think from both the NASA website, but also I think from Google Earth Engine might be higher resolution, but what I know is that the currently available from the NASA websites, the 8-day products are at 500 meters spatial resolution. And temporal coverage, and I know MODIS is still operational, although it has come, I think, end of its lifespan, because some of the data being generated or has been switched off, or maybe we have realized that from 2022 the data is no longer usable, and particularly for leaf area index, we were able to assess that and we discontinued use and we switched into VIAS data. And so some of the work that we are doing, or already work that has been implemented, we have done all of Africa, sub-Saharan Africa from 2002, and this data is available on the NASA website, the OR dark archive. And I think Julius will try to show you how you can get that data in his demo if we have time. If not, we pass that and save it for another day. But also we have done some work for the Horn of Africa, where our project is based mainly Horn of Africa and Southern Africa, but in future, we are planning to implement this for all of Africa. So don't worry about, oh, West Africa is not covered in terms of VIAS, but it's work that we are planning to implement. The woody canopy cover estimates, these are derived from various products, a medium resolution product from MODIS reflectance and radar. The input that I put, at least for sub-Saharan Africa, is based around 2005, but of late, working in the lab with Julius and our colleagues here at NMSU, we have been able to get high resolution woody cover estimates based on Sentinel optical and radar backscatter. Another key input for our analysis to fine-tune the partitioning models is the mean annual precipitation. We know that most of the woody cover, the woody elements for an area to either have 0 to 100% cover is driven by mean annual precipitation, at least for Africa. Woody closure or woody canopy, open canopies are being driven by water resources, and this is mean annual precipitation. And so we use this to like create an allometric model that can be used to in our partitioning algorithm, and I'll show you in a few minutes how this gets utilized in our models. And so here we are using climate hazards infrared precipitation with stations data, CHARPS, which has a spatial resolution of about 5 kilometers or equivalent to 0.05. And here we tend to use a 30-year average. So you do climatology for Africa to get the growth gradient across the landscape driven by precipitation. And so the allometry has a function of mean annual precipitation. So we calibrate our models with data collected from all over Africa. These were in situ data from literature, but also fieldwork that we have been able to do so far over the years. We have collated data that has been useful in our models, and so we have been using this to model against precipitation, and so to see how does each one of the precipitation gradients influence the amount of leaves. So imagine within your landscape, like in your natural landscape or a place in a conservation area that has not had a lot of influence from human or anthropogenic or grazing influence that has taken away the leaves from the tree. So imagine that tree that is growing in native environment, and so you identify that tree and across different species, and so you say, okay, well, within this neighborhood or within this precipitation regime, I have a tree that is able to develop this match within this species category. And so with that, you can be able to say, well, within a precipitation gradient, for example, the desert or the very arid ecosystems might not support trees. And so you eliminate that and say within that, where you see that flat line, there is nothing that we expect. But as precipitation increases, it increases with, the leaf from the woody vegetation increases with precipitation, but it reaches an asymptote at a certain level where it can no longer be just going on and on. So because we have reached 100% canopy cover, and so within your tree, how much leaves, as we said, how much leaves can be contained in that tree? And if you have that information, you can be able to say, well, within this ecosystem, the potential amount of leaves that can be contained, or LAI that can be contained within trees in this area is this much potentially. But then we have areas that could support, but they don't have trees. And that's where the leaf area, the woody cover component comes in to be able to constrain that relationship when we are talking about, okay, well, I have the hypothetical increase in canopy LAI, but I need something else to constrain it. And so we are able to do that in drought deciduous woody cover vegetation areas. And so you take your aggregate LAI, this is the native area LAI coming from the satellite. And so we model using the allometry, and we are able to get leaf area index from the trees where we have said the allometry is based on precipitation. And so with that, we are able, and we can constrain it using the woody cover, the TW component there. We are able to get the the woody cover component. And so once we have that, using this allometry, I forgot to update this figure. Sorry for that. We have updated the data that we are using for these models. This is way back for a paper that we did a couple of years ago. But just to let you know that we have been able to like develop this relationship, and so we can get using the woody canopy cover the potential or the hypothetical increase in canopy LAI, and being able to get that component of the woody cover. And from the difference, we are able to get the LAIH. This work has been done for Sub-Saharan Africa, and the data is available, as I said, in ORN DAC. I don't know if Phoebe wants to say something about the rangeland as a support decision tool that they have been implementing using some of the data. And I want to encourage you guys, if you have time, you can explore some of this data. And as you can see, we have on your left, the aggregate leaf area index, and you can see that dynamic change as precipitation changes within Africa. You can see where we have December to around March, the Southern Africa is wet. I think in northern part and the Western African Sahelian countries, we have precipitation falling from, I think, June or thereabout to around October. So you can see that change. And so with the aggregate and the precipitation regime and the input data from the satellite that we are getting, we are able to separate that and say, well, within this context, then we have this woody, this component that is coming from leaves, but also from the herbaceous element. And this was we did some analysis to see how our models were performing. This is old. It's part of my paper, but nothing much has changed other than like tweaking and fine-tuning some of the input data. For example, now we are using higher resolution woody cover component, and so we think it's improving our output in terms of woody vegetation, but we are also targeting including an epokio or interval time, a couple of years time interval, to be able to, for the woody cover to be able to capture some of the changes within the woody cover element, so that it is input into the models, because we cannot constrain our models without the woody cover. And as you can see, the moist tropical forest, everything goes to the woody component. In Horn of Africa, we see the woody and herbaceous. There are some ecosystems that are dominated by woody, where there is a lot of trees and shrubs, but also the herbaceous component has been captured in the Sahelian region. And you can see, for example, the Horn of Africa, the bimodality of the production system. The Eastern Sahel, we have herbaceous higher than the woody cover, because we know in that region the trees are much less due to the lower precipitation in that region. Southern mesic, you can see in southern part of the continent, the southern dry, and also Namib, where we have a unimodal precipitation, but it's towards the end of the year. You can see towards the end of the year, and at least until around March, April, thereabout. As I said, this data is available for you. So I did share these slides, and I'm sure Julius has been able to update and deposit it in the shared folder. And so you can be able to access this data. And if you have any questions, it's all of Sub-Saharan Africa. And I want to let you know that this data, it doesn't come as I'm showing in my figures. It is split in tiles, just as the native aggregate LAI comes in modest tiling grid system. And so the data that has been deposited there, so you can identify your area of interest and be able to download tiles that are covering that region. Planned updates and refinements. We have been working on this over the last couple of months during our SERVIR project for this AST. We have been able to use refined woody canopy cover estimates for Eastern Africa. And so we were able to update this using both MODIS but also VIAS data. But we have plans to generate this every 3 to 5 years, and so far we have been able to develop woody canopy cover estimates for Africa. I think this is around year 2021, and looking at the future, we want to be able, not necessarily using Sentinel, we are looking at producing epochal estimates, either based on 250-meter resolution of MODIS and VIAS data, or 500-meter resolution, but we want to be able to develop it epochally because, as I said, our input, the woody canopy cover input, is used to constrain the model to identify where the trees are. And if a drastic change or a significant woody cover was removed, and yet our model is assuming that it's still there, then it would input some of the some of the LAI will be into the woody cover, when in reality that is not the case, because we have not been able to capture the change that has happened across the landscape due to deforestation or whatever. We are also working on this type of models to be able to implement this in all of the US. And here, just to make sure that it's clear, for our African models, we found that even if we added things like temperature, it was not going to be meaningful. But in the case of North America, or contaminous US, we want to incorporate precipitation, but also temperature, because we know a lot of areas here, due to the winter and the summer changes and the monsoon precipitation regimes, we have to incorporate the two components, both precipitation and temperature, because they are key. I also wanted just to dive into some of the ways we can do forage scarcity index to be able to monitor drought. And so for you to be able to do that, I've already taken you through one of the products that we have been able to develop. But beyond that partitioned LAI, what do you need to do to be able to monitor drought conditions? And so you need to have to be able to develop your product into an index, as for example, a forage scarcity index. I know there are quite a number out there, and you could use the vegetation anomalies or some of the VCI components I've seen out there. It's also an anomaly computation approach, and these are usually based on different other observation products. So as I said, it could be from precipitation or meteorological data. It could be coming from soil moisture. But in our case, we are going to focus on LAI, although we know that most of the current models, even when you look at the European agency and also some of the products that are implemented in North America, they are based off NDVI. And so using the partitioned LAI, can we be able to do that? And I know Julius will be doing a demo for us to understand this. So here we will be, as I said, we would be using 8-day LAI data. So you have to aggregate that temporal aggregation, and by temporal aggregation, I mean you do a monthly LAI data by averaging across. If a certain date of your 8-day LAI data falls within a certain month from January through December, then you take the average for the dates that fall within that month. Then you do the cumulative LAI to be able to capture the season. As I said, season is key. Season is key, or the growth season is key when you are doing the computations. Then you do accumulation for you do Z-score in this case to be able to forward. Is someone asking a question?
I think someone has their mic. Someone has their mic unmuted.
Okay, so we continue. So with the cumulative monthly LAI, then you can do seasonal index by computing the Z-score. And so depending on your application, you might decide that I want to do this at per pixel level. But more often than not, we have found that this might not be meaningful because of the noise that is introduced in a lot of our data. And even if we are implementing some smoothing and data filling, gap filling, whatever, we are doing some gap filling steps, it still doesn't capture the trends as we would want them to look like. And so we in computation, maybe you will take the 8-day LAI and decide, instead of you doing at per pixel level, I might aggregate it at 5 kilometer resolution, or within a district. Let's say you are working in a certain district, or within your country, it's divided into counties or districts, or whatever administrative level that you might want to aggregate your data. You take your LAI, your 8-day LAI, you extract the 8-day data based on your administrative boundary, and so you have the aggregate for that data, and so you have a time series of for your window of coverage. Let's say, for example, the Horn of Africa, we have two wet seasons, and one of the seasons is March to June, or in I think in Niger it's from July to, I think, November. So you do that, your temporal accumulation for that period. And so once you are able to do that, then you do the normalization so that you get the index. And as I said, you have to be keen when you're doing the coverage, because you might decide, I want to do an annual product, or I just want to focus on when the forage should be available. So depending on your application, for example, you people are managers and you want people to have information before a certain time, and so you might want to do a monthly update. You can do this. Nevertheless, you can do monthly, you can do seasonal, or you can do annual products based on the aim of your or the objective of your analysis. But in this case, because we want to create or to provide updates and information about the performance of our forage availability, then you might want to do seasonal, but also monthly estimates. Just an example of how that would look like. For example, this is some work that I've done in Kenya. For example, in 2016, during the short rain season, short rain is October to December, it was a very poor performance. Anything in black shows that the vegetation was performing very poorly. Anything in red, it's bad, but not as bad as black. Anything in orange, we are still not doing okay. 46 to, I mean, the yellows, we are moderate, but we are still not okay. Whereas anything that is green, as I'll show, we are doing really well in terms of vegetation performance. And 2017 also short rain season. You can see the eastern part of Kenya was doing really bad, whereas the northwestern part of Kenya was doing okay. But here is the irony, is that, as I mentioned to you, the models that we use to compute vegetation and forage index for these areas, it's based on NDVI, and that data does not account for changing or trends within the analysis. And so a lot of people in this area were saying, guys, hold on, we didn't have any herbaceous growth in our region, but in areas like Turkana and northern part of Kenya, in Marsabit, they didn't have any forage, and yet the models were showing that we have good performance, while in reality it was the invasive prosopis that has taken over a lot of the areas. As you can see, 2018 really bad. We have some greens and yellows, but most of the areas were really bad. 2019 the same, and then 2019 very good performance, and this was a spillover from, in terms of precipitation performance, it started early and it spilled over to the next year. And 2020 the same, but December 2020 it started performing poorly. And so looking at this and having access to this data, and as I said, our product is able to capture the browsing and the grazing elements of foraging, and so it's much better. We have done an analysis in northern Kenya, and we have been able to see that when you use the forage estimates from browse and grazing, the models perform better than when you're integrating or using integrated data where the representation has everything across the landscape. And so we will be working towards improving some of these products to be able to capture some of these changes, but also the different components, because we know our feeding preferences for our animals are also different. And so I'm going to hand this over to Julius to showcase to you some of the work that we have done in West Africa, but also across Africa, to demonstrate, to show a demo for some of the things that we have been able to achieve. And so with that, thank you so much. I hope I didn't lose people and you are able to follow my presentation. Thanks so much. Julius,
Yes.
unless there are questions, or we want to do a demo?
Let's give a few minutes, maybe 1 or 2 minutes for, let's allow for 1 or 2 questions if possible, and then I can dive in. Because of the interest of time, because we only have 20 minutes left, I am just going to go through a snippet of code that I prepared earlier today, but let's maybe give people a room for 1 or 2 minutes, 1 or 2 questions, if there are any.
Do you have any questions? You can raise your hand or write it in the chat.
So are there questions, anyone? I can't see anybody. Thank you. Thank you, workshop in progress. Okay, please, Julius, let's go on with the demo.
Okay, all right. Thanks, everyone. Thanks, Njoki, for that very detailed presentation. I think you've saved me a lot of trouble. I will not have to explain too many things because you kind of some of the things, the commentary I was supposed to provide during the demo, you've kind of explained it, but I would still revisit it. Because of the interest of time, and since we have another day tomorrow, what will happen is that we'll just keep going, and then we'll stop where we stop today, and then whatever that I'm not able to complete, we can spill over till tomorrow, and then tomorrow we'll try to wrap it up and then focus on then talk about other things, some of the other applications and things that we are mentioning. So for those who have been following up in the chat, okay, let me share my screen, just 1 second. If you've been following up in the chat, you'll notice that I've been pasting some links, and some of it is not finalized. So maybe if you came in late, there was a link posted to provide access to the Earth Engine repository. And this is basically the repository that would include some codes that we've created purposely for today's exercise. And then I also provided a link to a document which is in progress, and it's kind of like a write-up. It borrows some of the things that you've already seen in Njoki's presentation, particularly relating to the methodology of the applications that we are presenting. But it's still in progress. That's why I provided it as a link, because I'll still be editing the document in real time. So you can always come back to that link in the future to see if the document has been finalized. And then, of course, I just posted now a link. If you don't have time, if in case it is slow for you to, if you have your computer open and you have access to Google Earth Engine, you can just click a link to a code I just provided now, which will just directly open the code that I'll be demonstrating to you shortly. Is there someone with their hand up? Sorry. Okay.
Yes, someone's hand is up. Let me see what this.
Yeah, I'm not able to see everyone. For some reason, Teams only shows me like 8 people at a time, or 9 people.
Okay, the hand has been brought down, so please go. It may have been a mistake.
Okay, let me share. I think I've just momentarily forgotten how to. Okay, I see the share button. All right. So I'm going to share my screen. You are supposed to be seeing a link, a page, a Google Earth Engine page. Can you confirm that?
Yes, please.
Okay, all right. So for those who have Google Earth Engine, if you are able to access the link of the repository, so on the here, there's a repository here, LAI partitioning with several scripts. The script I am showing now is the one called LAI partitioning vertical slice. Let me increase the zoom so that you can read the text. And basically, what I mean by a vertical slice is that Njoki just covered the methodology for how we do the partitioning of the leaf area index to go from the aggregate leaf area index to the separation of the woody and the herbaceous leaf area index. And remember that she mentioned how we use a combination of woody canopy cover estimates, but as well as a model, an allometric relationship that has been derived between in-canopy LAI and mean annual precipitation. So what this script does is it allows me to demonstrate roughly how the methodology works, and I've custom it for an area in West Africa. You can actually change, if you go to the script, if you see here, where I save var AOI, if you can read what I'm showing here, those are the bounding box coordinates. You can change these bounding box coordinates to an area of your preference, maybe a smaller area if you want to follow that. But the point is that why you might want to hold on that, I wanted to demonstrate, I've created some specific points of interest to demonstrate how the algorithm works, because those points of interest are areas that I've zoomed in and predetermined what is going on there. So one point of interest is a savanna landscape. This is in northern Senegal. For those who know, or what they call the northern fellow in Senegal, for those who are familiar with the landscape in Senegal. Another point of interest is a shrubland area. So this is a woodland. It's shrubland mixed with woodland. So this is an area where there are trees and shrubs, but it's not complete coverage, like in a dense canopy forest. So woody cover can go up to maybe 50% or even less, can be 50% or less. And then there is a landscape south into the Guinea, around where you have the Liberia, Sierra Leone area, which is basically in a forest area. And I'm just providing that for control, so that this application is designed purposefully to be used in a dryland or in an arid or semi-arid area where you have a drought seasonality. So where you have not just rainfall variability, but also phenology that varies with vegetation greening up in the rainy season and vegetation drying up in the dry season. So all those points that I've created are within just here between the West Africa. So a gradient from the very dry, the savanna in northern Senegal, all the way down to the forest. Now, so to quickly run through this script so that we don't have time. So for this demonstration, I'm using the Modis VS product. Like Njoki mentioned, we've always used Modis. I'm using the VS product. Like Njoki mentioned, we've always used Modis because that was the preeminent leaf area, satellite leaf area index product that has been available for the past 20 years. And the data that we link to, the data that was already published in the Oak Ridge National Laboratory, and even the data that was already begun to ingest into the rangeland decision support tool, that is based on Modis. But because Modis is at the end of life cycle, we have to transition to VS, and we've begun processing data for VS. And so that's why I chose VS to make this demonstration. So VS will provide the continuity from Modis. So if you can see here, these codes basically import the data. They are both available in Earth Engine. The first one is Modis and the second one is VS. They are very similar products. If you go even to the metadata, the formatting, they are very similar. And that is to allow it to easy to merge both Modis and VS together. Then the second line here is an image that was derived. It's called mean annual precipitation. Like Njoki mentioned, it's a key component of this analysis. And basically, we've done a 30-year averaging of annual precipitation. So from 91 to 2020, and that's what we are using. Then very important too is the woody cover. The woody cover that you see here, when Njoki did her presentation, she was showing woody cover, canopy cover for that we derived initially for 2005, and that was a product we derived and published many years ago. But more recently, we've been deriving new and updated canopy cover products. We recently did one. I had done one previously for Senegal. We recently did one for the Horn of Africa, and right now, the one I'm using for this analysis is a new product for continental Africa. We haven't yet published it, but you can see this asset here. It's providing access to that. Here it is rescaled to 100 meters, but we have derived it for 20 at the 20-meter resolution. But for the interest of saving space and time, data in Earth Engine, because of the complications of the limitations in Earth Engine in exporting, we had to resample it to 100 meters. But we have it, we are processing it. We are processing a product for 20 meters that we will produce, that we would publish hopefully in the months ahead. And this is for 2020. And then all of these other codes are just to provide a couple of masks to kind of post-process the analysis. So for example, we have a water mask so that we don't have any data or analysis going on over water bodies, or also to eliminate the ocean, since some of our satellite data kind of spills, is particularly the woody cover data spills into the product. And this is to create our visualization for all the earlier layers we'll be demonstrating. And like I mentioned before, this is a bounding box, and I just created this bounding box just to capture West Africa, as you can see here from the script. And then the 3 points of interest that I'll be demonstrating using charts. So the code is very simple. It's not really complicated when you think about it. First of all, we've resampled, because our woody cover is originally at a less than 100-meter resolution. We've resampled it to match the same resolution and projection of the VS data. So that's to make sure that we are overlaying data that is matched both in terms of spatial resolution as well as projection. We've also resampled the mean annual precipitation, which is the CHEPS product Njoki mentioned, to match the same. And then we displayed on the map. Now, the first thing to do is that we want to filter our data for quality, and this entire function here basically performs just that. All this function I've highlighted here is to filter the data. Those who are familiar with Earth Engine would recognize some of these functions. It's a standard function, the commonly used function for data quality, for filtering data using the bitwise operation system in Earth Engine. And the end of the day is to retrieve so the original data has 2 bands, leaf area index and FARPA, fraction of photosynthetically active radiation. We are only interested in the leaf area index, so that is why we selected here. We ignore the FARPA data for now, FPAR data. And so after filtering, we have our first level of data. And for this demonstration, I'm only doing 5 years. The reason I'm doing 5 years is simple. First of all, I want you to actually run while I'm talking. If I go for 10, 15, 20 years, it will not run. It will throw memory errors in Earth Engine. But the data that Njoki talked about that we've already published and we are making available is actually processed for 20 plus years. So that the main product we are delivering would be for 20 plus years for the continental Africa. But for now, for this demonstration, I just want to do a live demonstration with 5 years. It's also good because I'm only using the most recent woody canopy cover data. So the 5 years would correspond to the woody vegetation conditions for that 5 years. If we start going back in time, we will need to use woody vegetation that corresponds to historical time period. And since I'm only using the recent woody cover now, the 5-year data that we are looking now would match the woody conditions that we've derived independently. So after filtering, we have our raw data, and the next thing, and this is critical, is smoothing. For those who've worked with satellite data, time series data, you'll know that you cannot just take time series data and use without smoothing, because it's always noisy. Even after you've applied the necessary quality flags, it's either you have to deal with missing data, gaps, data that has been masked out, or you have this very noisy, and as you can see here, the first graph you see here on the right, this is the data that has not been smoothed without any smoothing. So the top one there is for the savannah area in northern Senegal. So that's an open landscape. You can see the clear patterns of leaf area index peaking in the grain season, but you can see how noisy it is. You cannot do partitioning on this because that up and down means that when you're trying to do the separation of the woody and the herbaceous, it becomes a bit of a mess, and it wouldn't make sense. So you need to smooth out those the rough, the jagged lines from the data. Otherwise, it doesn't work. So this is for an open landscape. This is for a woodland, a deciduous woodland area, and then this is for a forest. You can see how bad the forest is. And all of this is because of like cloud contamination and all that you cannot eliminate from the data. So we have to smooth all of that out. So this entire function here, all of this is just to perform the smoothing. All of this here that I've highlighted just to perform the smoothing. What we've done is, first of all, we are using 3 different functions. The first function is a simple, if you have gaps in the data, you want to fill in those gaps. So we do a simple linear interpolation. This does not smooth the data, it just connects the missing data value so that you don't have any gaps in the time series. Because we cannot do the LAI partitioning with gaps in the time series. So the linear interpolation is a function. I've created we've created this as script model so that otherwise, because it will make the code too long. So we are importing them, but all of these models are publicly shared. So it should work even if you don't have access to the original repositories. Then the next function is something we are calling the upper profile mean. Njoki kind of tried to explain this in her presentation. As you see some of these jagged lines here, we want to reduce the low values because the low values are the more problematic ones. The values where the line is dropping deep and then going back up, those are the problematic ones. So we apply a filter that removes low values. And that means that we go through a moving window. So we apply a moving window, and within each moving window, we use a percentile range, say 75%, and we drop values that fall within between that percentile. That allows us to drop the low values, and that begins, and the curve begins to take shape. And then the last thing that we apply is what we call a Savitsky-Golay filtering, which is a very recommended and very popular non-linear smoothing methodology that it's widely used in different applications, and that's the function that you see here. So we apply all those smoothing functions, and then this is what we have. So you can now see the difference. It's still not perfect, but you can see how much we've improved from the raw Modis data to now that is relatively small. So you can still see this drop here. So we can improve on this further by maybe controlling the window, or even adding another smoothing pass, maybe a moving window average that will remove those layers. But this tells you how much we've gone compared from here to here. Especially in an open landscape like this, it's almost perfect the way we want it to be. But here it becomes, even in the forest, we still have ups and downs, but it's much better than what we had before, where every point it was dropping. And as you can see, the LAI in the forest stays above 6. So LAI typically ranges from values of about 1 to 10, and so it stays above 6. That tells us that most of our values are okay. And here it goes from very low values up to peaks in the raining season. And this little dip here in the middle of the rainy season is an artifact. We can further smooth that to connect those so that those dips go away. And here in the open landscape in the northern Senegal, this is almost, I will not say perfect, but it's almost as ideally what we want. So after performing the smoothing, it is when we apply the algorithm. All of this code here, without going into details, is basically applying all the steps that Njoki explained in her presentation. The allometry to derive the maximum potential landscape LAI, That is what we call here the max LAI. And then a series of conditional statements that basically says that, for example, if woody canopy cover is above 80%, we assume that it's closed canopy and there is no herbaceous there because there is not enough light to be penetrating for any ground layer to survive. So we assume that herbaceous is 0. Or like Njoki mentioned, if mean annual precipitation is in the hyper-arid, if we are in the hyper-arid zone where MAP is less than 100 millimeters of rainfall, we don't expect trees to grow there, and so we set the woody to 0. So we combine those different conditional statements in addition to the allometry that was defined up here, as well as applying a growth step, and then we end up now with our partition layers. We end up with a 3-band product. So each image now, the aggregate layer that we had before now has now been, which is the smooth layer, has now been transformed to two bands, 2 new bands now. One is the woody, and the other one is the herbaceous. And if you can zoom in here, this is what we end up with here. So this is the area where we said in northern Senegal, so there are virtually no trees here. There are some shrubs, but if you estimate the canopy cover, it's down to maybe 5% or even less. So that's why we still have some woody LAI. The red line is the woody LAI. So it's very close to 0 because there are virtually no trees in the landscape. And so what happens is that the small herbaceous LAI corresponds pretty much with the aggregate LAI. And it can go from, it can peak during the rainy season at values of 1.4 and then dip to near 0 in the dry season. Compared to this is the area where we say it's a shrubland, woodland area. So it's a savanna area, but it has a substantial number of trees and shrubs. Now, this is more similar to the theoretical representation that Njoki showed. So you have the blue line so the orange line is the aggregate. This is what we get from the body satellite data after we perform, from the V satellite data after we perform our smoothing. And then when we do the separation, as you can see here, so you have the aggregate. So as you are approaching the grain season, so this is February, this is dry. We have nothing, LAI is very low, so there is there's no distinction between woody and herbaceous because everything is dry. It's all deciduous, there's no grain. As things start to green up, we say that the woody LAI greens up first. That is why the red line starts here. It starts before the blue line. But there's a slight separation, it's hard to see, between the red and the orange. There's a small separation between the red and the orange. What we are saying is that the trees and the shrubs green up very quickly. They green up before the grasses. They don't need to wait for rain because they follow a phenological trigger, or they have roots that access groundwater. So they don't need rain to fall for them to start to green up. So they start to green up very quickly. And they reach a plateau. This plateau is defined by that allometry that we talked about, and it is controlled by the average rainfall in that area. So it cannot go higher than this because we've already determined that because of the rainfall in that area, the woody LAI cannot go beyond that plateau. So now, as the total LAI continues to increase, we assume that the excess LAI now is the herbaceous because we assume that the woody has reached a plateau that is controlled by our allometric equation. So this is where you have the blue now that captures the total, the herbaceous. So it's basically the difference between the orange and the red. If you take the red and you subtract from the orange, you get the blue. And then again, at the end of the season, the herbaceous goes back to 0, and then the woody LAI drops down. It doesn't completely drop down because it's based on an allometry, and because of that allometry, it really doesn't go down to 0. It stays to a certain value. So rains repeat. So 20, 20, 20, 21. Now, just to end here, because I do not have time, we are a few minutes over time. Tomorrow, I will demonstrate with another code that shows how we were able to derive this for East Africa but also go into the drought season drought monitoring applications, whereby, like Njoki mentioned, we move beyond just these estimates to creating monthly and seasonal anomalies where we can see definitively, okay, this year or this growing season has been a good year, and so we don't expect, food security, any food security risks compared to another year that falls below the anomaly where we expect it to be a drought year. But just eyeballing, even without anybody saying anything, you can see just from this chart, and those of you from West Africa can confirm to me, can validate this, maybe or not, that the growing season of 2022 seemed lower generally than the other years, and you can confirm if that had to do with a drought year, if 2022 was a slightly drier year compared to, say, 2021 or 2024. But you can just see that. But normally, we cannot make that conclusion based on 5 years of data. We make those kind of conclusions based on 20 years of data. So let me stop here today, and then we can pick up from this tomorrow, and then try to make more time tomorrow to talk about other things. So yeah, any questions?
I can't see any hand up. So okay, thank you very much. Oh, okay, Emmanuel. Okay, go ahead, Emmanuel. Yes, you can speak. Please unmute yourself.
About the presentation that Madam Njoki did, she was talking about the woody canopy cover estimate. I wanted to ask if it's the same as calculation for tree cover density.
Not exactly the same. Density, if I understand correctly, density would be the number of individuals, right? More like, okay, tree cover density is, yes, I think that will be the same. The moment you mention cover implies that you're dealing with the area of the crown, right? So by tree cover here, we simply mean if you take a pixel, if you're looking from above, if you're looking at the ground from above, how much of that pixel is covered by the crowns of trees and shrubs? So that's basically a percentage value, and that's what we are using here. So I don't know if that's what you meant by density.
Because from our end, let me veer away from the discussion. We are also looking at charcoal production in Ghana, and also trying to curb the unsustainable practice of charcoal production. And also our target area is the Savannah zone. And I see that you are also interested in Savannah area. So we are unable to estimate the tree cover in that particular area. When we use the Global Forest Tree Cover Index, we are still unable to generate, data for the Savannah area in Ghana, the northernmost part of Ghana. When I even look at your scripts in GE, I noticed that the northern part of Ghana still has very little amount of data regarding tree cover in that area. So I'm seeing a similar thing like what we also get.
Yes, I understand what you mean. Yes, we have work. Okay, so this is the tree cover data. This is our most recent estimate, and it's still we are still trying to finalize this one. One of the problems, so the first thing I'll answer is that yes, we share the same concerns. First of all, tomorrow I'm going to go into more detail about it. In fact, tomorrow was the plan to talk about woody vegetation mapping, because I understand that was relevant, especially outside of forest mapping. So tomorrow I'll go into more detail about how we do woody cover, and then you have a better understanding of that. Now, if the data you are seeing here is demonstrably, because if you compare the VCF data, especially the global forest cover data, you would find that when you get into savannas, there's basically nothing there. They say there is basically no tree cover. It's very next to zero. our product, even this product, is substantially better, even though you may think. So let's point to, say, somewhere in northern Ghana, for example. So we are saying there here that if you zoom in, really zoom in, okay, so there are pockets of trees, but remember that this is a 100-meter resolution. Our high resolution product, the 20-meter product, would do a better job of identifying those dense little pockets where we have trees. But as you can see here, we are still getting up to do an inspector, 40% cover in many places. So we are still capturing a lot of the trees. Although I do admit that in some areas there can be a slight underestimation. So like you see this dense patch here, we are able to capture that. That's a dense patch of forest, and we are up to 75% tree cover. If you go to, so a lot of northern Ghana, sometimes, because I have had this conversation before, and we've actually had interest in working in developing this product on northern Ghana. So when you zoom in, you find that there is a lot of fragmentation, you see. So sometimes there are trees, but it's not like 100% cover. And our product is trying to reflect that we are more like in the region of, 30 to 40% cover, even though you might have the dense patches. So tomorrow, what I can say is that tomorrow I'll go into more details about how we derive the woody cover, and we'll even have a paper where we've just demonstrated what you said, which is that the problem in savannas is where many other products are underestimating tree cover, and that is why we derive our own tree cover, and it is very necessary for it to be accurate in particularly in the savanna area. So I think the best thing is that tomorrow I'll go into more details about the methodology and about how we do the tree cover. And oh, sorry, that's more this earlier.
No, I think
How we do
Julius also, because like the contrast, because you're showing 100% and other areas that are lower, even
Yes.
areas that might look like they don't have a lot of trees, I'm sure, like the place where you pointed that 8%, it does show that there is quite a significant amount of trees. And when we were doing a comparative analysis for all these continental products, whatever we have been able to derive so far is much, much better than what is out there available, at least for the sub-Saharan Africa.
Yes, Njoki, you make an important point. For example, if you see here, yes, I put the contrast to 80%. So if I bring it down to say 60%, you would find that a lot of areas are really close to even 50% and above, or 40% and above, which is very normal. Because what we've done in the past is that sometimes we make the risk of overestimating. You now see a lot more, the greening areas now, the tree cover now goes up. If you display the MODIS, the global forest cover product, you would find that even in these southern areas, like southern Senegal, or even most parts of northern Ghana, it's near zero. But you see, we are able to capture up a lot of the forest areas, a lot of the trees, mostly in the 30 to 40% range. But it actually corresponds much better to what you get from the forest cover product. And like I said, this is a 100-meter scale, which kind of averages things out. When we display the 20-meter product, it really picks out those dense patches. So for example, in the case of your charcoal monitoring, you will be interested in really, really small patches of land. And the 20-meter product will make a lot more sense because it will really capture those dense areas. But like I said, not to take too much time today, we will go more into woody cover mapping tomorrow. And then you'll understand a bit better how it works.
Okay, thank you, Julius and Njoki.